Today we are going to talk about story devices, flashback, foreshadowing, suspense, and cliffhanger. Flashback. Flashback is when the author interrupts a plot to describe a part of the story that happened in the past. Some examples of flashback. Cassie, poised at the end of the diving board, ready to plunge into the water. Suddenly, she was 5 years old again, standing at the edge of the dock and falling backward, unable to control her fall and unable to swim. Cassie is remembering when she is 5 years old. So this is an example of flashback. Another example of flashback. As the old man watched the boys playing baseball in the vacant lot, he thought back to his own boyhood and the friends he'd had in his hometown. They'd cleared debris and stray bushes from a lot and built their own baseball diamond, complete with an elevated pitcher's mound. The old man remembered the feelings of standing on that mound, exchanging signals with the catcher, and winding up to throw the pitch. The old man is remembering when he was a young boy and playing baseball with his friends as he was watching the boys play baseball. So this is an example of flashback. Foreshadowing. This technique gives the reader a clue about what will happen later in the story. Some examples of foreshadowing. Shelley felt relieved. She had finally finished her homework, completed her chores, and written a long overdue thank you note to her grandmother. Her relief wouldn't last long, though. Her mother knocked on the bedroom door and walked in. What is her mother going to say? Is she going to give her another chore? Is she going to tell her something? This is an example of foreshadowing because you know something else is going to happen, but you just don't know what. Another example of foreshadowing. Kathy skipped down the stairs. Her mother sat in the kitchen, wringing her hands. "I don't know about this," said her mother. "Mom," said Kathy, "it's just a party. What's the worst thing that could happen?" Her mother sighed. "Just be home before midnight." Well, you know something is going to happen, just by the way the author wrote this. So this is an example of foreshadowing. Suspense. A series of events or plot points that causes the reader to feel anxious and are used to build suspense. Some examples of suspense. Suddenly, Timothy noticed that all the birds had stopped singing. The air was very still, and not a single branch moved on a single tree. He looked up at the sky. In the distance, he saw a funnel cloud forming. He thought he might have about 10 minutes to get home before getting caught in the tornado. He began to run, his feet pounding on the pavement. He could hear the wind begin to howl behind him. Finally, he dove through the front door of his house and tumbled down the stairs. Well, obviously, a tornado is coming. And the author builds suspense by giving you clues that something is going to happen to Timothy. All the birds stopped singing. The air was very still. In the distance, he saw a funnel cloud. He thought he might have 10 minutes. So when you're reading this, you're thinking, oh my goodness, he needs to get in the house before the tornado hits. Another example of suspense. Linda heard a scratching at the door. As she walked through the kitchen to the living room, the scratching seemed to get louder. She assumed it was the cat, who might have snuck out, but she saw Snowball fast asleep on the corner of the couch. The scratching became more insistent and urging. Linda rushed to the door and swung it open, expecting to see something horrible or frightening. It was a branch, blown by the wind and scratching against the door. Okay, another example of suspense. The author used words like scratching, louder, insistent, urging, swung the door open, frightening, horrible. Okay, we've all been there. We've thought that something was happening outside and it ends up being nothing, like a branch or something like that. So this is an example of suspense. Cliffhanger. A cliffhanger is a story device that leaves the reader wondering what will happen next. Some examples of cliffhanger. The family gathered around the television to watch the lottery drawing. The TV announcer drew the first number and said, 6. Mom yelled, 6! We have 6! The announcer drew the second number, 10. Mom yelled again, yes, we have 10! The announcer said, and the final number is... Suddenly the TV went black and the room plunged into darkness. The last number! What is the last number? Exclaimed Mom. Don't you hate when an author does this to you? You want to know what happened, and they leave you hanging. Another example of cliffhanger. The driver swerved to avoid the oncoming truck and crashed through the railing. Far below, beneath the bridge, the swimmers watched as the driver dove out of the window and the car began to teeter. As the swimmers scrambled toward the shore, they watched the car slip closer and closer to the edge and heard the scream of metal. Someone called, "Run!" and everyone fled without looking back to see if the car had fallen. This is one of my favorite examples of cliffhanger because the car is actually hanging on the edge of a cliff. You don't know what is going to happen because the story or the paragraph ends before the author tells you what happened to the car.